Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my Game Week 36 preview, only 3 more of these this season, but in these videos we take an in-depth look at some of the key players that you might be looking at buying and potentially selling in your FPL teams. If you do enjoy today's video, please do smash that like button, and if you're new around here, make sure to subscribe as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So guys, I thought I would start today with what is probably one of the biggest decisions of the game week in Game Week 36, and that is the benching dilemmas that a lot of us have, right? There's only 3 game weeks left, and so getting a haul on your bench or getting a haul in your starting 11 can be the difference between finishing second or first in your mini leagues, right? It's absolutely critical that we get some of these key decisions correct at this point in the season. And I think especially those that get wildcarded in Game Week 35, your bench is probably looking relatively strong, especially in those attacking positions. You probably chose 8 good attackers so that you could bench boost in 37, and there's not really a standout weak option for a lot of people, otherwise you probably wouldn't have chosen them. And I think even for me, I wildcarded in Game Week 30, I've currently got a bit of a decision around, do I bench Garnacho or João Pedro? So I think for a lot of people, they'll have a benching decision, especially in those attacking positions. Now, I haven't included absolutely every single attacking option here. You might have a Darwin in there or a Salah or a Saka and all of these different options. But I think for most people, the benching decision they have involves most of the players on this list here. If you don't own all of them, which you obviously can't, just choose the ones that you own and look at the order that you can see to my this side. It's always the reverse on the camera. This side, you can see the order in which I would bench them, with 1 meaning I would definitely start them and 8 meaning out of these options, I think they're potentially the weakest. I will just say before I move on to explaining what you can see in this table and looking at the statistics for each of the players, in a single week prediction, and I said this for the free hit in Game Week 34, and it proved to be true with the likes of Mateta, in a single week prediction, stats can only do so much for you. And what I mean by that is, if I'm trying to predict over the next 6 to 8 game weeks, there isn't 6 to 8 game weeks left, but hypothetically, over the next 6 to 8 game weeks, I think stats are very useful to say, I think this player will score more points than this player. If a player is consistently putting up better data, they will usually score more points. That isn't always the case, by the way, but especially in a single game week. I mean, stats they're not useless as such, but they are very limited in what they can tell you, because a player can have like 0.1 XGI, have absolutely no goal threat throughout the season, but randomly the ball hits a player in the face, rebounds off the post, and just lands at their feet from a corner. They score, they get a clean sheet point and full bonus, and they come away with 11 points. That's just luck and variance in FPL. So I'm not saying completely ignore data, but I would say in a single week prediction such as who should I start, who should I bench, I do think data is slightly less predictive and slightly less useful. But obviously all I can do here is go through the data and explain how I would interpret it, and if it was my team, in which order I would start and bench these players. So what I've done is I've ordered the table based on who I think I would definitely start, all the way down to who I think out of these options is the weakest. I would just say the very fact that they're on this table means I don't think they're bad. So even João Pedro, who is currently in 8th on this list, I would still be absolutely fine starting him. I just think there might be slightly better options. So to explain the table to you, because it is slightly different how I usually do it, you can see minutes per game over the last 6. That's relatively straightforward. You can then see that for each player, I've got their non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90 over the season and over the last 6. And then I've got the opposition defensive rank based on expected goals conceded over the season and over the last 6. Now, the season data for both player and team is basically relevant to whether they are playing home or away this week. So the best example I can use, let's say Phil Foden. Phil Foden is playing at home this week. Therefore, his season data is only his home season data, and the opposition defensive data, Wolves, is only their away data. So it's only the home and away data relevant to them across the season. For example, I don't have Foden's away data here, and for Gordon, I only have his away data. Hopefully that is clear. So it's only the home or away relevant data, because I do think there are some key differences between players home and away. And then the last 6 data is both home and away, right? Just to give you a bit of an idea about what has their recent form been like and what is the recent form of the team that they're playing been like. Hopefully that is clear. And it does paint some interesting pictures, right? Because let's use someone like Gordon as an example. His home data is exceptionally good. Like, so good. He's returned in pretty much every home game this season. But as you can see, when you look at his underlying data away from home, it's 0.29 per 90. That's about the same as Andy Robertson. It's worse than Trent. It's about the same as Pedro Porro. I mean, Gordon's attacking data is virtually non-existent away from home. So it's whether you do trust this, whether you think it's a coincidence, whether you do go based on home and away. But if we are going based on just the season-long data, again, obviously for the players that are playing away, it's only their away data. The players playing at home, it's only their home data. Jackson is comfortably the best on this list at 0.67. You can see that no other players have particularly good data, and that's because the players that usually have good data, like Isak, like Fernandes, like Gordon, their data's much better at home than it is away, but they're playing away this week. So I would actually say, based on the underlying data, considering how good he is at home, considering he's got a good home fixture, Jackson's not only the best person to start, he'd be the best captaincy option. Genuinely, like, ridiculous data, but you do have to take into account a bit of common sense here, the fact that he's not a particularly good finisher, and the fact that he can be very, very frustrating. And once you take into account all of those things, then maybe Jackson's not the right person to start, because it's the same as what you get with like Darwin. Darwin's data is always very good, but you don't just always captain Darwin because he doesn't actually finish those chances. And this is where data can be great, but it can also cause a lot of traps and cause a lot of issues with respect to trying to predict what's going to happen in the future, because it's not just the underlying data, it's also the ability of the player to finish their chances and the ability of the players around them to finish their chances too. So Jackson's data is ridiculously good, but you can see he's down there on my list because, well, he's not finishing those chances. So across the season, Jackson's got the strongest data, and actually the second strongest data is the player that's at the bottom of the list, which is João Pedro. So across the season, Jackson and João Pedro should be up there as two players that we start. And João Pedro's on penalties as well. So even when I'm looking at this, I'm like, it's crazy, I guess, that they're even down there that low. But I will explain in a bit more detail why in a second. The other two players that have pretty decent data across the season, again, relevant to whether they're home or away. Foden's got pretty good home data, 0.54 non-penalty expected goal involvement. Son is very good, up at 0.54 as well. Sonny's data, away, home, doesn't matter the opposition. Son's just got very, very consistent data. Regardless of what you change the sample size to, he sits about that 0.5, 0.6 non-penalty expected goal involvement. So you can pretty much trust Sonny to get one or two chances in a given game. And in comparison to Jackson, Son is just so prolific. If you told me that Son gets 0.6 XGI in Gameweek 36 and Jackson gets 0.9, who would I rather start? I'd rather start Son, because again, his finishing is just exceptional in comparison to Jackson. So again, you do need to take into account the finishing ability of the player. Interestingly, looking at the two Newcastle assets, we know that both Gordon and Isak have better returns at home. But underlying data-wise, Isak's data away from home is still pretty strong. It's nowhere near as good as it is at home, but you can see here, it's still up there with some of the best on this list. Whereas with Gordon, Gordon's away data is absolutely horrific. He sat at a 0.29 non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90. To put that into perspective, that's the same as about Andy Robertson. It's about the same as Pedro Porro. It's worse than Trent. And the reason I'm using three defenders is to show you there are defenders with better data. I think it's worse than Rodri's is better across the season. I mean, his data away from home is really, 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 really bad. That is not good data. And it's happened over a long enough sample now that we have to say there is just something to be said that Anthony Gordon is not good away. And it's not just his output, it's the quantity of chances that he's actually getting is so, so bad. Whereas with Isak, it's definitely lower, but it's still good enough, which is why there's such a disparity between where Isak and Gordon are on this list, as well as obviously saying that Isak is on penalties too. The only other two to note is Bruno Fernandes and Garnacho. Both of them have better home data, and actually Bruno's is quite a bit better. You can see here, his data's actually relatively low at 0.41. The reason that Fernandes still is quite high up on the list, therefore, for me, is penalties, minutes, and as we'll discuss in a second, his data in more recent weeks has been very, very, very strong. So that's with the season-long data. When we look across the last six, it paints a similar picture on some players, but obviously not on all of them. So across the last six, comfortably the best on this list is Isak. Isak is in a ridiculous run of form. And remember that this is non-penalty expected goal involvement. So yes, Isak has had penalties recently, but you remove those penalties, he's still got the best data on this list. So I just don't see a world in which you could bench Isak. I'd even arguably have Isak now upon reflection, maybe even higher than Phil Foden. Isak is just a player that I don't think should be in the benching decision discussion. It should be some of the other players on this list. You can see here his data is ridiculous. And then Bruno Fernandes is in second. And this is one of the reasons why, while I know his away data isn't quite as good across the season, but across the last six, Fernandes has just been unbelievable. He's pretty much returned in every game over the last 10 to 12 games that Man United have played. And his data in Gameweek 35 was an absolute joke. It was like 1.2 XGI. So I just think Fernandes, given he's on penalties, given he's in a really nice run of form, given his minutes are always going to be very good, I just think Fernandes is up there for me as one of those players that I just wouldn't consider benching him out of all of the options that you've got. In third place is Phil Foden. And this is why Phil Foden's at the top for me, because across the season, his home data's good. Across the last 6, his data's good. He's had a bit of a rest. Assuming that he is fine and he's recovered and there isn't an injury issue that we just don't know about, assuming it genuinely was just a small bout of illness, Phil Foden's really not played that many minutes recently. I don't know what they'd be saving him for now. I would be very shocked if he's fully fit if he doesn't start against Wolves. So I just feel like putting everything together data-wise, Phil Foden just looks like a really good shout, especially, again, given that he's got a home game. So I think Isak, Foden and Fernandes, you can see her at the top there just because they've got good seasonal underlying data and also very good data across the last 6 as well. We'll discuss their fixtures in a second, but those 3 stand out to me. Anthony Gordon. His data across the last 6 is much better, but that's because he's had some good home games. And it's just this constant debate of, do you just not start him ever when it's an away game? I mean, it's Burnley, right? On paper, it's a fixture you should want to start him, but the away data is just not very good. So I can't wrap my head around it. It's one of the most bizarre things I've seen because most players on this list have better data at home. In fact, I think all of them, maybe bar, is it Son might have slightly weaker away? Slightly stronger away, slightly weaker at home, but most of them, and most players in the Prem will perform better at home, but not to the extent that we see from Gordon. There's over a 0.4 XGI difference between home and away data. So Gordon's been in a really nice run of form. Gordon is playing against a very weak defence, but the away thing makes me put him down in 5th, and you could even argue that he's below Jackson potentially, which seems bonkers to say because Gordon is so good, but yeah, it's just this home versus away thing. I'd love to know down below what you make of it because it's absolutely remarkable. We spoke about the fact that Sonny's data is just very consistent. The reason that he's in 4th is just genuinely due to his consistency. He's on penalties, he's a great finisher. He will get chances, and Liverpool, whilst their defensive data isn't awful, they do concede the odd chance here and there, and I think Son will take that if he's given it. Interestingly, Garnacho's data is a little bit better over the last 6, which is why he's not quite in last place. So despite him not being great away from home, his data across the last 6 isn't too bad. And I do think due to the fact that Bruno Fernandes is playing so well, I think Garnacho will get quite a few chances at the moment. So the only 2 other players I want to discuss individual data-wise before we look at the matchups is actually Jackson and João Pedro, who both have a real drop-off in recent weeks in their underlying data. So Jackson's data across the last 6 is 0.39 XGI, which really isn't very good. And then João Pedro's is even lower at 0.37. And Brighton in particular have been absolutely shocking recently. They've barely scored any goals. It's one of the worst attacking performances over a spell that we've seen this season. So it's part of the reason why Jackson and João Pedro are down there. I don't trust Chelsea. I don't trust Brighton. The underlying data over the last 6 isn't particularly great. And I also think the 2 of them, whilst their minutes have been very secure, Jackson in particular, I wouldn't be surprised to see them get an early sub or potentially get a rest in one of these games. So yeah. There's the underlying data. If we're looking at just data in terms of consistency, I think Foden, Isak and Fernandes and maybe Son are the ones that stand out to me. But Fernandes' away data is slightly worrying. Gordon's is very worrying. So's Garnacho's. Jackson's got good data across the season, but he just is not a particularly good finisher. If we're looking at the matchup fixture-wise, again, it's Jackson. West Ham are the worst defence in the league over the last 6, and they are also the 4th worst defence in the league So they are playing away for away data this season, right? Chelsea are playing at home. So West Ham are not good away from home. They've not been good over the last 6. They are just a really bad defence this season. So in terms of matchup, in terms of the best fixture, again, it's Jackson. So I do find it very weird sitting here and saying he's got the best season-long data, the best matchup over the last 6 and across the season. The only thing that's not going in favour of him is his data over the last 6 and also the fact that he can't finish his dinner. If you can overlook those 2 things, start Jackson. But that's why he's so low down the list for me. Then the second best fixture is definitely Burnley. They are better at home, by the way. At Turf Moor, they're much better, but they're still not a particularly strong defence. So it does make me think that just about I would probably have Gordon and Isak starting ahead of the likes of Jackson, Garnacho, João Pedro. Isak in particular, when you put everything together, penalties, minutes, data, matchup, Isak has to be towards the top of the list for me. In terms of fixtures which don't look particularly good on paper, the Crystal Palace game doesn't look great for Manchester United, especially given how good they've been under Glasner, although it's more with respect to their attacking data that they've been really impressive. They're around mid-table over the last 6 for defensive data. So I don't think Palace are like this suddenly the perfect defense. I just think they're scoring a hell of a lot of goals, which does make me think that it could be a high-scoring game. Fernandes could still get some joy. The other matchup, which obviously isn't ideal in terms of underlying data, is actually the Liverpool game for Son. But they do just give up the odd chance. And I just think I could just see this being a high-scoring game, given that Liverpool don't really have much to fight for now, unless Man City and Arsenal completely bottle it, which I don't think they will. Then they're really playing for nothing, so they could even be a little bit looser, a little bit less strict with their defending, and it could be quite a high-scoring game. And that would be my concern with benching Son. So what I've done with this ordering is I've obviously not just gone based on data, otherwise Jackson would be at the top. I've looked at the underlying data, I've looked at the matchup, I've looked at home and away, I've looked over the last 6, and I've just put together the ordering that I would have as of, and again, this is Tuesday just before midnight, this is the ordering that I would go for. I would have Foden and Isak very clearly as the top 2, right? I would not be even close to benching those, so call them joint first if you want to. I would then have Fernandes in solo third. I think he's an absolutely fine option. Maybe just due to his away data and how good Palace have been. Maybe not the perfect player to start. I would then maybe have Son as a standalone 4th again, just because he's consistency on pens, good minutes. There's very little to dislike about Son, other than maybe not in the best run of form. I think Gordon and Jackson would then be coupled again together. And I know a lot of people are deciding between Gordon and Jackson. This comes down to what you trust. Gordon is a better FPL option. I think he's a better finisher, and I trust him more as an FPL asset. But if you're looking at underlying data and fixtures, I think it suits Jackson more this game. So it really does come up to you. Don't come down to the way that you approach the game. I've just about put Gordon ahead of Jackson because I don't think Jackson's a good finisher. His underlying data worries me over the last 6. And I just think that I could just foresee, maybe it's a bit of a gut feeling thing, Gordon just completely wiping the floor with this, he's not very good away from home narrative. And I don't even think it's a narrative. I think it's genuinely true. But I could just see him absolutely smashing it in an away game. So I've just about got Gordon ahead of Jackson. But that's more of a gut feeling thing rather than what the data suggests. And then I think Garnacho and João Pedro are comfortably 7th and 8th for me. And this is the decision that I have myself. I'm just about leaning Garnacho at the moment because I tend to just about prefer midfielders to forwards. And I also think, again, over the last 6, Garnacho's data is slightly stronger than João Pedro's. The only thing that would make me question that is João Pedro is on penalties as and when he's on the pitch. So there we go. That was a very long section on benching. And I guess the consensus is just trust your gut feeling and go with what you feel is the correct decision. But that is the rough order that I would put these 8 in. If anyone could be bothered down below in the comments, let me know how you would order these 8 assets and where you think you would differ from my opinion. So moving on to the next topic to discuss, and it is actually Arsenal players. And I've had a lot of questions coming in around, do we ignore Arsenal assets for players that have one more fixture, or are we maybe even overlooking Arsenal assets? And to be honest, I've been going back and forth on this a lot. But I've got the fixtures on the screen for Newcastle, Man United, City and Arsenal. And the reason for that is the top 3 teams, Newcastle, United and City, all double in 37. And I would argue over the last 3 weeks, City, United and Newcastle are probably the 3 teams that double that you would most be looking to invest in now. Chelsea and Spurs have just had their double, or they are in the process of having their first double. So I don't know that now is the perfect time to jump on Chelsea and Spurs. And then with Brighton, I just think there are very few assets that you might want to go for right now. And also their fixtures overall are slightly weaker. So really when we're looking at, is it worth going for Arsenal? You're saying, is it worth picking an Arsenal player instead of a City, Man United or Newcastle asset? And I think this is very tricky. The way that I'm kind of looking at this right now is, yes, they have 1 less fixture. So you are getting a guaranteed 2 fewer points in just appearance points alone, assuming that the player that you bring in from one of the other teams actually plays all of the available fixtures. So that's the first thing, is that you need the player that you bring in to be nailed to even say that they are going to get an extra game. Because if you're talking someone like Gvardiol, I think Guardiola's great, and we're going to discuss him in a bit. I would argue he is one of the best defenders to own, if not the best defender to own for the remainder of the season. But can I confirm to you that Gvardiol starts all 4? No. Let's say that Gvardiol gets benched in one of Fulham or Spurs in 37. You are then saying, who is better, Gabriel for 3 fixtures or Gvardiol for 3 fixtures? And when you frame the question like that, the answer is Gabriel. Gabriel's got greater attacking threat, definitely greater goal threat. He's playing in a better defence and arguably has better fixtures. If you say that, let's say Gvardiol gets benched in the Fulham game, you've got Wolves at home, Tottenham away, West Ham at home, or for Gabriel, Bournemouth at home, United away, Everton at home. There's not a lot between it. And so you do, the first thing to know is you need the player that you're bringing in from one of these other teams to start all of the remaining fixtures, all 4 of them, to even say that they are worth considering alongside Arsenal assets, especially with the defence. So that's the first thing. The next thing to know is, even if they start all 4, what are you expecting from them? So let me now switch to Manchester United as an example. Let's say this week you're looking at, should you bring in Gabriel or Ben White, or do you think someone like Maguire or Dalot is a better option? The question I'd start, so I'm going to flip questions back onto you because that's what I do on this channel. For Manchester United, how many clean sheets are you expecting from Palace, Arsenal, Newcastle, Brighton? Palace is not going to be a clean sheet with the way that Palace are attacking at the moment. Arsenal and Newcastle, regardless of whether they're at home, I would be extremely shocked if United keep those two teams out. The only one I could see being a clean sheet, maybe, given the way they're attacking, is Brighton. But it's the final game of the season. You might not even need to start your Man United asset that week anyway. So let's say you're probably, and I don't think this is harsh to say, you're not expecting a clean sheet from Man United. So you're going to get appearance points in all the games, but you're not expecting a clean sheet. Let's say optimistically you get 1 attacking return. So you're going to get 8 appearance points, 1 attacking return, let's say that takes you to 11, maybe a couple of bonus, but you'll probably lose some points in this period, right? Because you're going to lose points for the amount of goals that the teams will score. Let's say in a couple of these games that the teams score 2, 3, 4 goals. I reckon from your Man United defender, unless you get super lucky, you're probably looking at somewhere between 8 and 10 points over the next 4. If Gabriel keeps 1 clean sheet, he's going to match that, if not outscore it. And I'm not trying to build a narrative here. Like, I'm a Man United fan, so I'm not just hating on United. I just don't see a clean sheet there. And Dalot and Maguire, they've not got bad attacking data, but how much are you expecting from a defender across 4 games? I think if I was to then ask you realistically, how many clean sheets do you think Gabriel gets in the next 3 games? I think most people would agree 1 is very likely, 2 is possible, 3 isn't out of the equation. Then I would chuck on top of that, well, Gabriel's actually more of an attacking threat than Dalot and Maguire. So if you're telling me you think Dalot or Maguire will get an attacking return, I'd probably suggest Gabriel also does. So again, it probably won't pan out this way. You could get that Maguire scores a brace in 1 game like Ben White did. You can't predict particularly well in FPL and in football, but based on probability, I would say Gabriel will outscore Man United defenders. And you can do the same for Newcastle and Manchester City, but I think that becomes a lot closer, right? Because Newcastle, Burnley, Brighton, United, Brentford, I would expect a clean sheet there. And then if you're also saying maybe 1 attacking return as well, I think it becomes a little bit closer. And for Man City, you could even argue it's even closer there because City are a really, really good defence. They seem to have picked it up a little bit recently. Gvardiol is getting into some incredibly good positions. I would say when you start to get into that comparison point, then no, it's not as straightforward. And obviously, this is just the defenders, right? When you look at the attackers, you've got a very similar discussion to be had. I just think with the attackers, any attacker can score in any game. And I think as long as they've got okay underlying data, like for Manchester United, no. Arsenal, Newcastle, Brighton, Palace, these aren't perfect games. But could Garnacho or Bruno Fernandes score in any of these games, especially Bruno, who's on penalties? I think it's a lot more likely. So I think with the defenders, I'm increasingly more and more interested by just loading up on Arsenal defenders because when I view it the way that I just have, I'm like, I don't see many defenders outscoring Arsenal here. But on this, for the attackers, I wouldn't sell Saka right now, but would I look to bring in Saka for someone like a Bruno or a Foden? I probably wouldn't. Whereas I think Gabriel coming in for a Dalot might even be a transfer that pays off. So that's kind of the way that I'm viewing it at the moment. I'd love to know down below what you think because this will split opinion. And in general in FPL, I have been someone that tends to go all in on the doubles. And so bringing in an Arsenal asset this week who's got Manchester United away in Gameweek 37 when some other players have 2 home fixtures and a double game week, it does feel a little bit against what I would usually do. But you can't overlook the data and you also can't overlook how bad, especially the other defenders have been in FPL this season and just how good Arsenal have been defensively. So yeah, I mean, I'm going to discuss the defenders in a bit more detail in a second. But I've just prefaced it there. I think Arsenal defenders in particular are worth bringing in above and beyond a lot of the other double game week options. For the attack, the likes of Havertz and Saka, if you've got a free transfer to use this week, and maybe you've already got a Bruno or a Foden, and you're looking to bring in another asset, I would maybe even say that someone like a Havertz or a Saka could get close to outscoring a Garnacho or a Gordon. But if it was Bruno, Foden and Saka, I still think I would have Bruno and Foden slightly ahead of Saka and Havertz in the pecking order, just about. So there we go. Basically, I love Arsenal defence. I still think the attack is good, but I would maybe value some of the doublers over the singlers in the Arsenal attack. So guys, to be honest, I think I spoke about this in a lot of detail in the previous section, so I'll just clarify, clear up, and then move on to the next section. But if you've just skipped to this section, I would now advise going back and watching the previous section, simply because I talk about the defence in quite a bit of detail. But as I said, Arsenal defence is just absolutely stupid. They've got 2 home fixtures remaining. One, the away fixtures against Manchester United. I could genuinely see 3 clean sheets, but I would say a very minimum, based on what we've seen. You might not get any, but based on what we've seen, a minimum of 1. And therefore, if I'm not backing some of the other defences, which I'm really not, like Manchester United, and to some extent, even potentially Newcastle, Spurs, well, then why not just back the best defence in the league? So I'm having Arsenal defenders above most of the doublers. The only doublers that squeeze in there in and around the Arsenal assets, Guardiola is top for me. It's not just based on the 15-pointer. His attacking data across the season is actually pretty decent. It's up there with the likes of Gabriel and Ben White. He's getting into some really advanced positions. He seems relatively nailed. And City are the only defence that get close to Arsenal this season for underlying data. They're nowhere near as good. And I still think they give up quite big chances in games, and they make silly errors that Arsenal don't seem to. But I still feel like you've got a good defence with a player with good attacking data. Seems relatively good for minutes, at least for a Man City defender. You never know with City defenders, but Guardiola seems pretty secure. I still think at the moment Guardiola's just ahead of the Arsenal defence. So I myself have 2 free transfers this week for the defenders. At the moment, I'm bringing in Gvardiol and Gabriel. That's my current plan. Could be Gvardiol and Ben White, by the way. But I already own Raya, and I would love to know what you think of this down below. Do you think this is like a genius move or just a shocker? I've got Raya right now. I'm wondering, do I bring in Gabriel and White with my 2 free transfers? No, I've got 1 free transfer, so it'd be for a -4, but I need to make defender transfers. Do I bring in Gabriel and White? So what I would be doing is tripling up on the Arsenal defence for the remaining 3 games. If you get 1 clean sheet, that is immediately, assuming they play, 18 points. So I know if they lose the clean sheet, it's mega pain because 3 of my players have lost points. But it could be worth doing, especially, like I said, if Gvardiol does miss a fixture. But anyway, Gvardiol for me would still be top. Then followed by the Arsenal defence. I've just chucked Burn ahead of Saliba because Saliba is really good for bonus points, but he doesn't have much attacking threat, and he's relatively expensive for what he offers. So with White and Gabriel, I think they've got the attacking threat and the clean sheet potential. Saliba's got bonus points, but only really clean sheet potential. So I wonder if Burn, for his price, might be worth just squeezing in there, considering that Newcastle have improved slightly defensively in recent weeks, and also on top of that, the fixtures aren't bad for Newcastle. So Burn might just about sneak in there for me. And he's probably the second best double game week 37 option outside of Gvardiol. Walker is in 6th, just because I don't necessarily think Walker is less or more now than Gvardiol. I would argue it's probably relatively similar. But the reason he's so much further down is he doesn't have the attacking threat that Gvardiol has. So with him, you are reliant on clean sheets. And he's also not very good for bonus points. So yeah, you might get the odd assist with Walker, potentially, but you're very unlikely to get a goal, and you're not going to get many bonus points. So for me, whilst he's still worth considering, he's not up there with Gvardiol, Gabriel, Ben White. I then think you do have to consider the Man United players, but like I said, I'm not expecting clean sheets. They're not going to get you that many attacking returns, so they really, for me, would be a little bit lower down the list. Pedro Porro, just through attacking threat alone, and the fact that he does play Burnley and Sheffield United in 2 of the remaining 4 fixtures, he has to be considered. But the other 2 fixtures are Liverpool and Man City, and Spurs are not good defensively. I could see Sheffield United and Burnley scoring against them. So with Porro, it's really for the attacking threat. I suppose there's justification that you could have Porro ahead of Dalot and Maguire, potentially. In fact, you probably should, but I've said in the title, this is assuming that you have to start them every game, and I just wouldn't want to bring Porro in, considering I'd have to start him against Liverpool. So if you have to start him every game, Porro would be lower down. If you could get away with not playing Porro this week, he's probably up there at around 6th, I would say. You've then got Van Heck, again, deserves consideration. Brighton are actually pretty decent defensively, but not much attacking threat. I don't expect many clean sheets. He's okay. Not much of an upside, though. And then Tarkowski and Branthwaite. Everton, similarly to Arsenal, to be honest, they've just been keeping clean sheets. But I just think they don't double, and they're also nowhere near as good as Arsenal for defensive numbers. So if you're going to go for players from teams that don't double, I'd probably just back Gabriel and White slightly more. But I do really like the fixtures for Tarkowski and Branthwaite. Tarkowski in particular has got attacking threat too. Branthwaite's pretty good for bonus. So for their price, they're definitely worth considering. So there we go. There's a bit of a discussion around the best defenders to buy. Lots of people in positions this week to buy them, myself included. I've currently got 4 defender injuries. And at the moment, it's either Gvardiol and an Arsenal defender, maybe double Arsenal defence, or I might try and sneak maybe Walker or United or maybe an Everton defender in there potentially as well. So lots of people looking to bench boost in Game Week 37. Understandably, it's the only remaining double game week this season now that we're in Game Week 36. I guess Game Week 35 hasn't ended. But anyway, the only remaining double. Lots of people have been building towards it for a while, especially if you wildcarded early rather than 35. You might now be looking at your team and thinking, I've got 4 or 5 injuries. I've got, on top of those 4 or 5 injuries, 3 players that have a single game week. Maybe 1 player has lost their position. I'm looking at needing, across the next 2 weeks, maybe 16 points worth of hits to field a bench boost that I am truly happy with. What is an acceptable hit to take in order to be able to bench boost? And would you recommend taking hits to bench boost in 37, or just bench boost with a weaker bench and no hit? So, in general, my answer to this, if it's earlier in the season, I would say if you're starting to get to a stage where you need to take a 8 or 12 point hit to bench boost, then you just shouldn't bench boost in that week, right? That would always be my advice. You don't take a 12 point hit to bench boost it, because as you can see in the title of this graphic, it kind of does defeat the purpose. If you're taking a 12-point hit to bench boost and your bench scores 20 points, and if the hit was genuinely just to improve the bench, your bench booster scored 8 points essentially, right? Because you've had to take 12 points of hits to get there. So generally, yes, it does defeat the purpose of the bench boost if you've got to take an enormous hit. But right now, you don't really have an alternative, right? It's not like I would say don't take the hit now because you might be able to bench boost at some point in the future when you wildcard for your second time. You've got no chance. You've got 3 game weeks left. So you almost have to take a hit to build the best bench boost you can. So with regards to what is an acceptable hit to take, as long as you think each of the hits that you take, each -4 hit in isolation, has the chance of paying points back. Let's say you're moving a player that's injured to a player that doubles. Well, just through appearance points alone, you are going to gain with that transfer, right? So let's say it's a 4-point hit. You bring a player that doubles and you're taking out an injured player. You will gain 4 appearance points. So just through appearance points, it will make back that hit. So yeah, I mean, there is no number. If it's a -20, it's a -20, because unless you're just saying you're going to either not bench boost or bench boost with no players on your bench, you kind of have to take a hit. So I guess this question is a little bit less useful now because you kind of have no other option. I guess the other option would be, let's say you don't have too many injured players. Let's say that you've just got a bench of, I don't know, let's say it's something like, so you can see some options here. Maybe you've got 8 Nuri, Regulon, Raya, and Solanke. It's just a random idea for a bench there, but you've got 4 players with only single fixtures. Not terrible fixtures on paper, but you certainly would prefer to have stronger players. Is it worth taking a hit to do Raya to Onana? Is it worth taking a hit to do 8 Nuri to Van Heck? Is it worth taking a hit to do Solanke to Højlund? For me, I would say in some of those occasions, yes. I think if there is clear upside in the player that you're bringing in and the player that you're taking out either has a slightly weaker fixture or you just don't see them getting you that many points, I would be very tempted to go for it. But I wouldn't force out single game week players just because they only have 1 fixture. And I'll use David Raya as the example because I currently own David Raya. I look at this now and I think, no, Raya's probably not going to get me more than 6 or 7 points. But could he get me 6? There's a good chance. And so if I take a -4 to remove Raya, who gets me 6, and bring in Onana, am I confident Onana gets 10 points? I'm really not, because if he just makes a load of saves and doesn't keep a clean sheet, which I think is very likely, he's still probably only getting 6 or 7. So let's say that Raya gets 2, which I think would be a pretty poor score for him, but let's say he gets 2. Onana's still got to get 6 points to outscore Raya. And again, if he makes saves in both the games but concedes quite a few goals, I think he'll probably end on somewhere around 6. So yeah, there's definitely upside, because if Onana does keep a clean sheet and make saves, Onana could get, as we saw with Jordan Pickford in Game Week 34, Onana could get an 18-pointer, right? That's absolutely plausible. But I would be less keen on taking a hit to do something like Raya to Onana. If it's something like 8 Nuri to Fabian Schär, let's say he's fit at that time, well, then I see that as a clear upside, because I think there is a chance for a clean sheet in one of those games for Newcastle. He's got some attacking threat, and I don't think 8 Nuri keeps a clean sheet against Crystal Palace. So I guess I'm just going through some very niche examples here, but I suppose what I'm trying to explain is that I don't think there is a set number of hits, because you need to play the bench boost if you've still got it. So your only other option is playing 36 or 38. I don't like 36 because there are so many injuries at the moment. 38, you just never know who's going to be rotated on the final day. So I do think it kind of has to be 37 for most people. And so just take the number of hits that you think you need in order to give you a bench boost that you think will outscore the amount of hits that you take. Right? So look at each hit in isolation and just think, does the player that I'm bringing in outscore the player that I'm taking out by more than 4 points? The only other final thing I should note, and I'll bring it back to the Raya example, is Game Week 38 is just as important as Game Week 37. So not only does taking Raya out for Onana maybe not make the most sense for 37, in 38 you are going to want an Arsenal defender, right? So Raya against Everton at home is better than Onana against, is it Brighton or Brentford or something like that away, right? So not only are you going to maybe lose points in 37, you're almost definitely going to probably then lose points in 38. So there we go. I feel like I haven't really answered that at all. But I guess just to say, don't be scared to take a hit because you need to use the bench boost. But try and view each hit in isolation and just weigh up who scores more points. The player you're bringing in for a -4 or the player that you would have instead. So just to finish up, there have been a lot of questions coming in around chasing in mini leagues and if I have any advice from my years playing FPL, and I definitely do. You could say it's just simple, take risks and bring in differentials, but I think there are better ways to chase than others. And I think I've made the mistake in the past. I probably started playing for rank around 2021, 21, 22. So only relatively recently did I start playing FPL for rank. I played it for a few seasons for mini leagues. And the mistake that I would make when I was chasing is, number one, starting to chase too early. So it'd be like Gameweek 26. I'm like, oh, I've got to take a risk because I'm 50 points behind. We saw in Gameweek 34 how quickly that can switch. So that's the mistake I've made. But also going too different. Just because you're chasing a 30 or 40 point lead, it doesn't mean you've got to suddenly start taking like ridiculous risks, bringing in players that are just not good options with difficult fixtures. All you have to do is nail one or two decisions that are different to the person that you're chasing. And all you need is the person that you're chasing to have a couple of stinkers, get a few injuries, get their captaincy wrong. It can change very quickly. I think the only reason that I wouldn't look at what I'm doing here and I would just go like fully rogue is if you're like 60, 70 points back at the moment. Because then you're looking at, you've got to make up like 20 plus points in each of the 3 remaining weeks. That is a lot to make up, especially if the person leading knows how to play FPL. So, but if you're, let's say, looking to close a gap that is between 1 point and 30 to 40 points, I would follow these few pieces of advice. So the first thing is, captaincy has to differ because this is the big chance that you'll get every week to land a really nice differential haul. Yes, you can bring in different players, but the captaincy, you don't even have to have different players to them. You just have to back one of your other players in comparison to who they back to do very well. And so what I would say is don't captain stupid players unless you really want to, but captain the second or third best option every week. I can guarantee that if your mini league leader owns Haaland this week, they're probably going to captain Haaland, assuming that he is cleared as fully fit. Could you captain Phil Foden instead? Absolutely. Could you captain Cole Palmer, who I actually might captain myself because, again, I am chasing at the moment? Absolutely. So again, with captaincy, you've got such a great opportunity every week to back against the popular player, but that doesn't mean go stupid. I would just captain the second and third best option every week and just don't captain the best option. Unless, and this is where it becomes mind games, unless you think your mini league leader is someone that goes rogue with captaincy, then maybe the differential thing to do is actually captaining the obvious player. The next thing to do is, and again, this is more so the case if you are really chasing, is completely back against their team. If they've got double Newcastle defence, you are doing nothing to help yourself bringing in a Newcastle defender. In fact, I would argue you could even sell your Newcastle defender. And I know that sounds stupid, but you're losing out. If Newcastle keep a clean sheet, you're still losing to them. And if Newcastle concede, well, you're maybe gaining on one player, but you could have gained on 2, right? So I feel like you have to really back against. Look at their team. Look at what moves you think they'll make. And just make sure you have very few players that are exactly the same as them. The next thing is chasing those high upside picks. Don't bring in players that are... Who's a good example? Maybe Solanke. So, I mean, you probably won't bring in Solanke now anyway, but he's a player that ticks along very nicely, like 6 to 9 points, but that's not going to close the gap. You need those players that have shown on a consistent basis that they can get 15 plus points. Foden, Trent, Havertz. Those players that have really good goal threat and the ability to haul, those are the players that you should be chasing. Maybe even ignore the doubles. Just focus on players that in a single game can go out there and get a huge score. They're the players you should be chasing. Also, maybe look at players that have really good underlying data in recent weeks but are currently underperforming. I've listed a few options here. Salah, Johnson, Richarlison, and João Pedro are 4 of the top options that have really good underlying data, but they're just not finishing their chances. Those could be players that you maybe look at. Or maybe just think about when you're watching the games. Are there any players that you're like, that player is right on the cusp of getting a haul, but it's just not happened for them? Those are the players I'd look at getting. I wouldn't look at bringing in players that are already getting 3 or 4 attacking returns a game. Like, absolutely smashed it, because not only is your mini league leader also likely to go for them, but you've maybe missed their points at that stage, unless you expect that to continue. I'd look at the players that aren't returning. Look at the players that have blanked 3 or 4 games in a row. Those are the players that you should be considering bringing into your team. And then the other thing is, maybe put all of your eggs in one basket. And that is not an egg pun based on my egg. It's to say that we like to diversify in FPL. Sometimes we'll say, well, I've already got Gusto, therefore I won't play Petrovic, I'll play this goalkeeper, right? Because we want to not put all of our eggs into one basket, because if the team that we back concedes, then you've lost like 2 or 3 clean sheets. But on the flip side, if you back something to happen and it happens and you go all in on it, it can be huge. So triple up on Arsenal defence. I spoke about this already. If they get 2 clean sheets in the remaining 3 fixtures, every time they keep a clean sheet, you are gaining 18 points. So I would say through appearance points, 2 clean sheets bonus, if Arsenal keep 2 remaining clean sheets and you have 3 of their defenders, you're probably getting over 40 points there. Maybe more with attacking returns. Same with Man City attack. Let's say that you back Man City to just score a shed load of goals. Foden, De Bruyne, Haaland is massive. Not many people, probably your mini league leader, will not have that triple up on the attack. So it could go horribly wrong. If you back triple Arsenal defence and they concede in all their games, disaster. But on the flip side, I feel like the best way to really close a gap is to go all in on what you think will happen and not to spread the risk. It's too late in the season to start spreading risk. So there we go. Some of this stuff will be fairly obvious to you, but lots of people might not have been in the position in FPL before where they are chasing. It's honestly more fun than defending a league. If you're defending a lead right now, it's probably the opposite of what I'm saying here. You play defensive moves and you block those that are chasing you. Chasing is a lot more fun than leading and trying to block. So have some fun with it. Definitely pick some differential options, but don't go crazy. Follow these 5 steps, and I think you're in for maybe a small chance of catching your mini league leader. So guys, there you have it. That is my Game Week 36 preview. We are coming towards the end of the season very, very soon. And if you have enjoyed these episodes throughout the season, where we take a bit more of an in-depth look at some of the players that you might want to bring in, please do consider liking. I do appreciate it. If you're still not subscribed and you've watched a few of my videos before, please do consider subscribing as well. Until next time, which will be my team selection video. Thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.